Okay, we're getting to an exciting part of Basar בחלב, Basar בחלב Siman Tzadik Daled. A lot of concepts were covered. Now we're getting into the meat of it, as we say, into the actual situations that could happen in the kitchen. So Tzadik Daled deals with this in the very beginning, with Din HaToichef Kaf Choleves B'Teresh Basar, putting in a Melicha spoon by mistake, of course, into a fleshike pot, or the other way around, meat spoon into a dairy pot. And this happens, it has happened, it may happen in the future. You know, it's a good thing always to, it's brought down, to be able to have a separate Simanim in colors on fleshikes and Melicha dishes and cutlery, so that you could easily tell that they're very different. That you should, if you have a guest over that's going to be using their home, obviously train them to be able to identify one from the other. You have a maid, shouldn't be doing too much cooking unless, of course, you're there. But if she's trained and she knows, and sometimes they know more than the balabosta, you know, especially if they work in another establishment, but they were very, very careful, they may know some of the halachas too. So anyway, in these areas, mistakes do happen. So it's important to know what to do. And sometimes we don't know the halacha, it's not clear, we have to ask. Knowing to ask a shaila is also an indication that the person is thinking right. Because, there are all kinds of situations, and I will mention a couple as we go along. All right, in order to understand Sif Aleph, which is what we'll do today, some ideas that we have to keep in mind. We mentioned them in the past, whether it was earlier in Basar בחלב or in Taaruvot. There's a concept called Cham Miktzos Cham Kuloi. That concept is really what is defining pretty much the halacha on Sif Aleph. Cham Miktzos Cham Kuloi means that metal, the nature of metal is such that if part of it is heated, it conducts heat. Metal conducts heat. Conduct meaning that if we have a piece of metal, 12 inches long, and the bottom 6 is hot, we say that heat somehow will travel. Maybe it may take some time, but it will travel and get to the top, even though there's no heat being applied to the top 6 inches, only to the bottom 6 inches. That's just the way the physics.
Top 6 inches?
Beyond the element of heat that's causing the heat. In other words, there's different ways that, of course, you can apply heat. There's heat from fire, direct fire, and there's heat through cooking, where the fire is beneath the pot, and there is something that you're sticking into the pot, into the hot water. So it's not directly touching the fire. We'll see there's a very important shach on that and the difference between the two.
Tzli?
Yes, a form of tzli. Yeah. And the other form is bishul in ekdera, where in both cases you have heat, but we will see that the shach makes it. He's the only one I think I've seen.
Generally speaking, just
right. Generally speaking, for the time being, cooking only.
So where is the spoon, the broth?
Relative to the broth, we have a spoon or a fork,
It's
or
a spoon.
either one.
Okay.
The first example is kaf choleves. It would be a broth, yeah. So you would have something being inserted into that pot. It could be a spoon, a fork, or it could be a ladle, whatever it is. Makes all the difference.
But now, what about
part of it is inside, part of it is not.
Inside what?
Inside the broth.
Inside the broth.
Right.
And the other part that is outside the broth is outside the broth.
We'll get to that.
Oh.
That's a question. That's not clear. If you read the Seif, we don't know that. We don't know that. We have to assume certain things. We have to assume in reading this Seif that we have a problem, and it's an obvious problem, that if you stick something Melicha into a fleshike pot that something is cooking, we're talking about that it's being inserted into the broth itself. That's the general understanding of what is happening. But we will see, Ilan, you have a point. Okay.
I wanted to clarify in case you...
Yeah, but we have to take one step at a time. Right. So the first step is to understand...
So you just said in the broth?
Yes, I did.
For the time being?
For the time being.
Right,
exactly. That's correct. Okay. So the point is that Cham Miktzos Cham Kula is something that is across the board. Across the board only means that everybody agrees that metal conducts, and that somehow there may be consequences as a result of that in Hilchos Yisur V'Heter. Because Cham Miktzos, we see Cham Kula. Now, where do we know this from? Where's the Mekor, other than physics? How does it pose a problem in halacha? Where is the first halacha, or where is the first situation where we come across this? In the Gemara Psachim, Ein Dalet, I think. Yeah, where the Gemara says very simple over there. There's also Mishnah about it. In preparing the Pesach, the Korban Pesach, you recall, there's a special recipe for it. No soy sauce, not that kind of a recipe. Korban Pesach is sli ala esh, which means no cooking. It means no water. It means directly roasted on the spit. Is that how you call the shpud in English? Yeah? The barbecue. Now, barbecues come in all kinds of, they're made differently. The Halacha says that when you make a Korban Pesach, you can't use a metal spit. The shpud cannot be made out of metal. It just cannot be made of just any. Why? Because there is the concern that that metal is going to become hot. And then, as the Korban Pesach is being roasted on the fire, even partially could be that meat will be roasted from the metal and not from the fire. And we want it to be roasted from the fire, not from another source.
That would puzzle it.
That will puzzle it. Then there's other exclusions of other kinds of material that may have some moisture in them. If I recall correctly, therefore, one of the best ones is the wood of a pomegranate tree, which is dry. No moisture, in order to accomplish this. So anyway, so we can't use the metal. Even though ordinarily you could do sli, you can do a great job with sli on a metal, but not the Korban Pesach. So over there we see this idea. We learn over there the cham mitzvah cham kula, even though part of it is hot. We're concerned, of course, that it will all spread. Because that's what the heat does, that's what the metal does. That's the way the heat on the metal works. All right, so now that we understand that, we also need to recall, even though it's not that important, I don't know, but the various poskim do mention it, so I'll mention it too. We do need to recall what we learned in Siman Tzadik Beis. In Tzadik Beis, we also learned something, a concept called piapua. Remember that? It's a very unusual word, you don't see it too often. It's about drops of milk falling in a pot from the outside. It could fall also on the lid, but it just happens to be that over there we're talking about heat as well, and it happens to be that we have a very major concern there, that the drop, even though it's a drop, it could spread. And if it spreads, it can cause us a big problem, because then when you're calculating the amount of food to be mevatel, it may not only be a drop, it may have to be an entire area. All right. Those were the halachas that we covered in Tzadik Beis. And we have valid concerns over there, especially if it fell b'makom reikan. Remember, makom reikan meaning in the empty area. Falling right across where the food is easier. All right. Now, if it does, what we were introduced there to is the similar concept that heat with this tipa will allow this to spread all over the pot. Okay. But as we will see, even though over there the heat appears to cause the tipa, the drop, to spread, it happens in a different manner than chamik soso cham kuloi. In other words, the concept that we are learning more about right now is going to be different than that concept, which means that you may agree, you may say that over there piapua is an issue. You may not say that here when we're dealing with the concept of chamik soso cham kuloi or not. And even if you say chamik soso cham kuloi as an idea, it does not mean that you're going to complicate your situation. In other words, one may say chamik soso cham kuloi is a fact, of course, but it does not mean that I have to be concerned about it. All right. Therefore, let's begin with the Seif Aleph, and we'll see how that affects the halacha. So, toichev kaf choleves b'gdero shel basar o ifcha. We're dealing with the example of inserting a dairy spoon, into a pot of meat. Now, this pot of meat does not mean that it's a pot of meat. There's actually meat in that pot at this time. In other words, in this particular halacha, there is basar, there is stew, as you mentioned. There's something there that is fleishik. It's not just a meat, a pot. There's actually some meat there. Or ifcha, or it's the other way around. There was a fleishik, a spoon, in some dairy dish. So what's the halacha? Misharim bechol ma shenitchav mimeno begdera. You calculate in figuring out We're concerned about the spoon, of course, but the spoon is no big deal. You'll just make hagala to it. We're more concerned about the contents of the pot, in this case. Melicha and fleishik, right? So you calculate how much meat do we have? Do we have enough to be mevatel the blias, the tam that is in the spoon? Let's say it was a spoon. So how do you figure? You have to figure, of course, the contents against what part of the spoon? The whole spoon, or just this part that was inside the basar? So the mechaber is going to bring two opinions. In this kind of a situation, in this kind of a scenario, we have actually three shitas, two of which are mentioned over here. Shita number one, the smak, which is what really we hold like. And it's also the sharidura. And that is that you only calculate and you only concern yourself with the part of the spoon, ladle, fork that actually went into the food. It may be long, but you don't, and the whole thing may be melichas or fleishiks, because it was used, throughout. But we don't really need to concern ourselves about the top, that which is sticking out from the broth. Now, that part that's sticking out, is it cold or hot? I don't know yet. The mechaber didn't mention anything about that. I'm assuming that it's cold. Why am I assuming that it's cold? Because of what he's going to tell us next. That if the kaf is metal, you do have to consider the whole kaf. Here it is. If it's a metal spoon, it conducts heat, then I have to concern myself and I have to have 60 or enough connected the whole spoon, because even though only part of that spoon is inside and the rest is out, it's now, if he tells us as being a problem here, according to the second shita, we can infer from that the typical situation that we're dealing with is that the portion outside is cold. Otherwise, why would he tell us right? Supposedly, yeah. In other words, ordinarily, that's what really is the case. Ordinarily, you take a spoon that's cold. The whole thing is cold. And you put it inside. The bottom may become hot, but the outside is still cold. What would be the halacha if the outside is cold? We'll get to it, right? So based on the wording alone, and on this concept being used here by the second shita, there is such a shita, and that's the shita of Rabbeinu Peretz, that because of cham mitzos or cham kuloi, which everybody knows and everybody's familiar with, yeah, but because here it's actually going to be a problem, and that is that we say that you have to figure against the whole spoon, even though the upper portion of the spoon is not in the food. No, it has blias too. It has blias. We assume it has blias. So, if the bottom half is hot, the top is hot as a result of cham mitzos cham kuloi, and therefore everything is hot. Everything is to be accounted for. There could be blias, there could be plitas, there could be, because it's all hot. That's the second shita. Now, before we go on and explain these shitas, I'm going to get to it. Before we get into the third shita, before we explain more in detail these two shitas, let's go to the Tur who brings this halacha. As you know, the mechaber copies or brings down, summarizes many of the halachas of the Tur, and he elaborates on them. Doesn't always necessarily go along with his psak of the Tur, but because the Tur's father, the Rosh, was only one of the opinions that the mechaber based himself on. Now, so the Tur, in bringing down this halacha, this situation, says like this: whenever you're dealing with a spoon being put into a pot, fleishik into melichas, and that you have to calculate, one of the things to keep in mind when you calculate is that we tell you to calculate against the whole spoon or part of the spoon that's inside. We don't tell you to calculate how much came out. I put a spoon, calculate how much would have come out from the spoon into the pot. We don't tell you to do that. That's not the approach. Why would you even think like that? Well, because there is a shita like that. There's a shita of Rabbi Elyahu Kin b'Shem Aravid. We spoke a little bit about it. I think he's almost alone in this. That when it comes to metal, not clay cheres. Clay cheres. B'klei cheres, mishar b'kula, he says, all of it. But when it comes to metal, or wood, He's the only, it's one of the only shittas that hold that you can actually, if you can estimate how much came out, that would of course depend how long you held it, and so forth. If somehow there's a way to estimate how much came out, you could do it. We don't hold like that. Ramban, I think, says that we don't go by that. You won't see it anywhere. So the Tur explains that when I tell you, when we learn this halacha of misharing, that you're going to calculate, we're not going to tell you to calculate by how much you estimate came out. Why? Very simple. Because we don't know. So the reason why you won't find this shita, or this way, this approach, anytime in Hilchos Isser V'Heter to calculate how much came out, because we don't know. It's very difficult. So we tell you, figure out by the entire spoon. You can't be wrong. You can't go wrong with that. Maybe it's a chumrah. Okay, what can you do? We don't know. That's why we won't tell you, figure out by the amount. Figure out by the amount, the spoon. So the Beis Yosef continues on and says, okay, there is, however, a possibility that you may know how much came out. What's that possibility? We talked about that. If it just happens to be that you just bought the spoon, and you just use it once, so let's say, for making, stirring your milk chocolate, or whatever. You were making chocolate milk. You know exactly how much there was in that pot when you were stirring it. It was 3 ounces, or whatever, right? If you happen to know what the amount was used with that spoon, especially the amount that was used within the last 24 hours, because it could be an old spoon. It doesn't have to be new, because we're concerned about what was used in the last 24 hours. Remember that? Otherwise it's pogum. So it could be a new spoon, or it could be that it was just used now, within the last 24 hours, and you know that amount, then yes, I agree. Beis Yosef says, on that, no problem. But usually we don't know, usually we don't remember, right? And by the way, by not remembering, sometimes people don't remember how much of the spoon actually went in.
Generally speaking, they don't.
Generally speaking, they don't.
Attention.
They don't pay attention.
Remembering.
Exactly.
They don't pay attention.
They don't pay attention, right? So therefore, it could be a question. Unless he has an idea, we can go by that idea of approximately. I know I didn't put the whole thing in. Okay, fine. We can rely on that.
By Der Shulchan, I don't remember whose opinion.
Yeah.
The attention to it.
Right.
Is subsequently.
Right, because in general, it's something that people do not generally pay attention. We can't expect them to know.
Right.
However, in this case, if he says, "I know approximately,"
Well, if he mentioned.
no, even though he didn't pay attention, but I know that I don't put the whole thing in. We may be able to rely on that. That's what I saw. Somebody explained that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was clear session.
Yeah. But that can easily happen. Like you said, we don't pay attention. Yeah.
So if it's more than 40, we don't need to calculate.
Once something is pogum, we're safe with the contents here in this pot.
You're not allowed.
You're not allowed to. Yeah. Right. But you're right. It wouldn't be a problem. Hagolah is something else. What you need to do Hagolah is something else. But the food, you're safe. All right. So now let's go back. So the Mechaber brings down 2 shitas as to how much do you need to calculate, or do you have to be concerned with Cham Mitzos and Cham Kula or not? The first shita says, even though it doesn't necessarily disagree with Cham Mitzos and Cham Kula, as we said, that's a fact, pretty much, it doesn't seem to be a problem. Why not? According to the first sheet, that you basically only calculate against the part that went into the pot. Why not? Because even though you may hold Cham Mitzos or Cham Kuloi, you don't say Cham Mitzos or Cham Kuloi legabe blias or plitas. We don't say that just because the bottom is hot and the rest will become hot, that it's strong enough also to take that which is at the bottom half and be mavliya it on the top, or be maflit, extract the blias from the top. In other words, yes, the heat spreads. I agree, Cham Mitzos Cham Kuloi, but it will not be such a big deal over here, because we don't say Cham Mitzos Cham Kuloi the top traveling as a result of that heat that is at the bottom. Whereas, what's the other shita going to hold? Shita Rabbeinu Peretz. We say yes, Cham Mitzos Cham Kuloi all the way. If that's what you hold, it means that it's hot enough in the bottom, it will eventually somehow affect the top. And if it affects the top, it becomes hot, then the blias go with it, or the plitas come out of it. So therefore, when you stick in a spoon, even though the top portion is cold, still, because of the heat at the bottom, it will have the koach of extracting that which is on top too. Or be mavliya too. It could be mavliya too. Now, what's the third shita? I told you there was a third shita. That's pretty much the shita that is brought down in the Mogen Avram or Chaim there. There's additional nafkaminas here, but the following shita basically makes the following distinction. Mogen Avram and others. The cham mitzos or cham kulo has the koach to be mavliya, not to be maflit. In other words, you can go ahead and affect the top part, but not to extract from it. That it doesn't have. What difference does it make? It will make a very interesting difference. According to the Mogen Avram, let's say you had a spoon or a ladle or something that could use both ends of it. You can use both ends. Even if you can't, you did it anyway. So we said cham mitzos cham kula means that you usually cooked it with the bottom half, but because of cham mitzos cham kula, it affected the top. Were you to eventually use the top part inside, right? Were you to switch it around and use the top and stir it, you would now need shishim keneged that part that is now in the heat. In other words, at first, cham mitzos cham kuloi, in other words, it was mavliya all the way on top, but it's not being maflet from the top. That it doesn't have the koach. But since it was mavliya there, were I to switch it and put it inside now, I have blias. It would be maflet there. It would not be maflet. It would not come out if it stays on the top where it is cold. But since it was nivla there, and I went ahead and switched it, it was nivla. It was absorbed there. Then I would have to be concerned now too. That's the difference between these. And he helps, based on the Mogen Avram explanation of the way cham mitzos cham kuloi is, we see that the difference between this and piapua is completely different. Somehow in piapua, it spreads regardless. And the reason for that, the Meforshim explain, is because that's sitting on the pot, the whole thing is becoming hot. We have to understand that it does appear to be a stira in the smak. The smak is the one that he's concerned. Remember in Siman Tzadik Beis, we had a concern about piapua there. And here he's not concerned. He says, yes, cham mitzos cham kula, but so what? It won't affect that which is on top. But over there you said it does affect. Over there we're concerned about spreading. So what's the explanation? Well, it could be that over there the whole pot is sitting on the fire. And the whole heat is affecting the pot in a different way than a spoon being put into a broth. Where cham mitzos cham kula, even though it exists, will not have the koach to make the tam travel all the way to the top. Whereas in piapua it does. The whole pot is hot. Comes along the Pri Megadim, it tells us the following. Actually, the Pri Megadim, the Rabbi Kiva Eger, and the Chavas Das, they said that the chidush by cham mitzos or cham kuloi is that the top is tzoinen, right? That even though the top is tzoinen, the top is cold, cham mitzos or cham kuloi. Except that the smak holds, according to the smak, that nevertheless, even though it's true that it may be hot as a result, it won't be mavliya or maflit. That's a smak. So therefore, the premier God, Rabbi Kiva Eger, I think Chavazdat, they all pretty much say, therefore, since that's the chidush by cham mitzosoi, where you may have the smak tell you that I'm not concerned nevertheless, even if it's hot, if the reality would be that the whole spoon is hot, in other words, I don't start off with a cold spoon. I start off with a hot spoon. I took it out from the Melicha's pot. It was hot. The whole thing was hot. You had a glove, hopefully, right? And you put it in. Then the cham mitzos cham kula, I don't need it. The whole thing is also. The whole thing you have to mishayir. No, it was the chidush of cham mitzos cham kula according to the smak. Remember, according to the smak only, not Rabbinical pairs. Where I say that even though the heat travels, that which is cold does not have the koch to be mavliya into it or be niflat. That is not the case if the whole spoon would be hot on its own. No, it's already hot on its own. Then it's different. That's what they say. We're going to see the Shach says something different. But what's interesting about this is that the Pri Megadim goes along and on his own he adds, so therefore I tell you the following. And I think he says that in the Mishbetzos Zov. The Pri Megadim has Sifsei Das, Mishbetzos is in the back. He says, therefore, this spoon that's in the spot, if you hold it long enough, and you can feel that it becomes Yat Soledis boy, then even the Smach, supposedly, would have to say that you have to be Mishar against the whole thing. So our case here in Sif Aleph is only when you're holding it, it's cold, you mix it on, then you realize your mistake. But if you held it long enough and it's actually becoming hot, then everybody supposedly would agree with it.
So in other words, Hamiktas or Hamkulo, in opinion, applies even if you can thought.
That's correct. Yeah, we still have to be Messiah. And I think the Pri Megadim explains on that after that the reason why it's not mentioned here, hot, cold, chilukim, is because the assumption is we're dealing with a case where the outside is cold, not hot too. Otherwise they would say it. In other words, that's the chidush here. The second shita is a chumrah. Remember, there's a famous klal in the Mechaber, you find it in various places. When he brings two opinions, the first one is called stam, and the second one is called yesh mi she'omer. Usually that's the order. We hold like the stam. We hold like the first opinion. But it does appear that the Mechaber, and you can see this from other halachas, may be machmer here. In other words, you should be machmer like the second opinion.
So you can't always rely on what you're saying.
Usually we do.
According to the scribble here,
Right.
we
Yeah, usually we do, but here,
we need to know when we can rely on it.
right, exactly. Just that the Ramah seems to be very, very strong about it. The Svara Rishona Ika B'chein Noyagin, because there's a lot of Rishonim, a lot of places who basically hold like that we don't have to be machmer. But if it's not if it's a big hefset, obviously, if it's not a big hefset, there may be some who would be machmer. Now, I did skip, and I'll go back to it now, that this halacha, this example, is imakaf ben yoimar, as we started mentioning.
Well, very clearly.
No.
Because it's garments.
Yeah, but I didn't read it inside. Imakaf ben yoimoy, that's what we have the problem. The haino sheshim shuboy, the kli rishon toch meisleis, that within the leisleis, they used it in the kli rishon. I have a very interesting idea here, that he says they used it bekli rishon. What does that tell you?
It was used in a cliche.
Right. So in other words, this opens up a kind of worms, they say in English. What if I didn't use it in the clearance? I used it in the Lishani. Right?
Right. So then according to, you wouldn't have a problem.
It wouldn't, according to Shemo, yeah. Kli Sheni, as you know, we have different opinions as to how much koach a Kli Sheni has. So, and this is, by the way, I think this is a very important nakuda. Not everybody pays attention to this nakuda of had this been a Kli Sheni. And this could happen at home. Okay, I used this spoon to eat my cereal this morning. That was cold. You didn't use it.
Nothing.
Exactly. The people, it's okay, it's from Melicha this spoon. Yeah, but wait a minute. And I used it today. Yeah, but how did you use it? You see how it's important to ask?
What if I had it to eat today?
Yeah, and that's what the cliche is. Right, very good. Chicken soup. Yeah.
Reverse,
What's the reverse? Yeah.
that you put it.
Yes. Also the same. Very good. Very good. Excellent. This is it's not on the stove. Somebody served you chicken soup, and you took by mistake a Melicha spoon. Oh no! What now? Who should we call? Let me run to my Sfarim trunk, and check it out. All you have to remember is that it's a cliche. By that time it will be called. Yeah. Anyway, so you're right. Very true. Yeah. That's why it's always important when you hear a shaila like that. You may have to go take 1, 2 more, 3 more steps to see. Okay, you used it today. How did you use it? Do you know how much was there? I mean, all of these things can make a difference. And now I have a chiddush for you, even though I was going to save it for the end.
We haven't finished yet.
Yeah. The poskim write that if this spoon that we're talking about over here, the kaf choylevas, instead of having been used with melichas, it was used with a tarovis chalav, a mixture of melicha. In other words, it was not pure milk. It was in some sort of tafshil that has milk, but it's not entirely cheese or milk. then when you are meshar keneged that part of the spoon that came in, you don't really need keneged the whole spoon. You need keneged the amount of chalav in that tafshil. Proportionate. So if you don't, you follow me? In other words, you don't. You need that. You know you're always going to need keneged the entire part of the spoon that went inside. That yes, but it's proportionate, as you said. Proportional.
Yeah. So what you're saying? If I don't know how much was inside, I would have to be mixing the whole spoon.
Right.
But now that I know how much was inside, what the mixture between the milk and non-milk was, right. So now I don't have a mishar against the whole part of the spoon, but only per ratio of the spoon.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, pretty much that's the way it works. Right. And that's very possible. That could happen too. Very easily, because we don't always in milk. It could be a taronis of milk. Therefore, it may be less of a shaila. You may have for sure more than shishim. It may not be a problem. You have to throw. Oh, do we throw it out? No, you don't have to throw chas v'shalom. Baltashchis. You don't just throw out things like that.
That's important.
It's important.
Some people know that.
Don't know. Yeah, you don't throw out food. There's a din of baltashchis. Yeah, you can't just throw out. There are times if there are chumras, okay. If it's a hefset mu'at, it's not a big deal. Okay, fine. There's a chumrah. But here there would be no chumrah if you know that it was a taaruvot. It wasn't a big deal. Or it was nice in tam lefgam, like you said before. Or it was a cliche in your example of the chicken soup. You put it in. Why throw it out? Now, I can understand people who have a fly falling into their soup, throwing out the soup. Okay, all right. That's called istiness. There are people that will take out this fly, this soup. There are people that will throw out the soup. And then, of course, you have Chinese who will throw out the soup and eat the fly. Yeah. You have all kinds, yeah. Anyway. That's already sensitivities. There's nothing you can do about that. Just have to be careful on Shabbos about boirer. Things fall in, how to do it right. You take it out a little bit with the liquid. All right, so here, the Ramah tells us, of course, we're dealing with a kaf ben yoima. Okay. And that's how we hold, like the first opinion. The Maisa, Halacha the Maisa. That's how we hold. Now.
With the fly.
Yeah.
So the fly would be a barrier.
Right.
So as long as one cannot discover the fly, one cannot discover it.
If you cannot discover it, it's a barrier problem.
Now that so now right now the soup is.
Yes.
But now that you've discovered and removed it, being permissible.
Sure, the isubein, yeah, that's correct. Yeah. Because as far as what the
soup wasn't the one that
and what the fly emitted is not a problem either.
It's
now, the Premier Godem and the crazy place, and I also noticed it in the Aruch HaShulchan. Very interesting.
Let's say it wasn't be a fly; it would be a piece of very delicious.
So.
And I identified it and took it out and
you still do it, sure.
So 60 will work.
Yeah.
Let's say it was a chashuv piece.
No, but but you took it out, so you're only concerned now about the town, no longer about the piece. Yeah.
So then 6 turns to being.
Sure. Yeah. So the Pri Megadim, b'shem aprach, I should say, b'shem pri chodosh, and the crazy place, and I saw it myself also in the Aruch HaShulchan. He also says it. Very interesting. He says that when we have to be meshar keneged the spoon that is in the broth, does it really mean only the part that's in the broth? Or does it mean that we have to be meshar keneged the whole part of the spoon in the k'dera? If you look at the Mechaber's wording, and you're very medayek, if you're very strict about the words that he's using, he says, B'chol ma shenitcha b'meno b'k'dera. He didn't say b'tavshil. Yeah, right? Good point. They make a big deal out of this. Some of the Achronim say, hey, even the Mechaber pretty much makes, when you learn Rashi, Rambam, and Gemaras, of course, you're in the yeshivas, they make a big deal about being medayek in the words. The words, and sometimes you notice a lot of chilukim. You are able to distinguish between all kinds of details as a result of the diuk of the choice of word that was used. Can you do that with Achronim? He's a border, Rishon Achronim. Mechaber is the borderline Rishon Achronim. In a sense, yeah. He was born in the late 1400s, so he's in the time where it's switching over. So he's born in the time of the last Rishonim, but he was young. He's growing up at a time where the first Achronim, the whole border of Rishonim Achronim is really, who made that decision. It's based on certain events in the world. It's like after the Inquisition, more or less, after this big change. But anyway, there's no doubt that the Mechaber was one of the great poets of the past few hundred years. And his Shulchan Aruch is what's being learned in the whole world. So, should we be medayik? Yes and no. Let me start with no first. Mechaber sometimes quotes, so it's not his choice of word. But he's not quoting from just anybody. He's quoting from the Torah. He's quoting from this. Yes. I wouldn't necessarily be medayik that he chose that word. First of all, he didn't necessarily choose it. When he's copying, he is choosing. Yeah, well, not necessarily. Yes, you could be medayik, obviously, because why not? You could have said tafshil. So why not be medayik? In other words, you could have easily have said a tafshil. The reason why here I wouldn't go along with those who say that he intentionally used the word dera is because generally the concern is that you put in, as we will see in the next sif some other time, is the mixture of basar and chalav, right? The mixture of tam, the mixture of the two combining. I mean, food. Why should we, at first thought, be concerned with that which is not in the tafshil? Especially when we're making here a chiluk to begin with. We're already making here a chiluk because of cham mitzvah cham koloi. Yes, it was.
No, that's the second.
Yeah.
The dera is in the cham mitzvah.
Yeah, no. Yeah, because we're already talking about this, that there's a difference between what's inside versus what's outside, that we're going to be mashar against just that what is inside. Why would somebody think? Why would somebody even propose that it's even including that which is outside the tafshil, but it's within the gedera? But there's nothing mentioned about that. Zeya is definitely does the trick here for those who are proponents of this. That even that which is in the gedera is a problem, not just that which is in the tafshil. That's a big thing to say that. Zeya is discussed at length in various halachas. I would have said that too, that this is a problem to him, but there's no mention of that.
The word kedera, so you
Yeah.
Even if someone else used it, he
Yeah.
just chosen not to use it, but used it
Yeah.
on its own.
Yeah. Anyway, so the Pri Megadim B'Shem the Prach in the crazy place, the Aruch HaShulchan says, that's the way they learn, by the way.
Is that what you said?
But in the Gedera, not in the Tafshil. You have to be Mashar against all that which is in the Gedera, in the Pot. And why, like you said, the Zeya? Now, the Chavas Das, I think I noticed, is the only one who holds... Yeah, I mentioned the crazy place. But the Chavas Das, actually, before we go to the Chavas Das, the Isur V'Heter, and ultimately the Chochmah Soda, who's much more recent, they hold that we don't have to be concerned. Just so you should know. They actually mention it. They said
only what's in the top.
Only what's in the Tafshil itself. Yeah. I did see, but it's not 100% clear in my mind because I didn't see inside the Chavas Das. The Chavas Das is one of the only ones, and we saw that Chavas Das in Siman Tzadik Beis. Was it Tzadik Beis or? By the Machvas, I think. By that cover, the metal tray covering the milch that's going up. In the oven, the pan. I think that was where we saw it. The Chavas Das, when talking about Zeya, he says Zeya has the ability to be mavliya, but not to be maflit. So even though it would be a concern here, Zeya would be a concern, especially if the Zeya here is Yatzir Ledes boy. See, I think the Pri Megadim, in discussing this, he adds the words, he makes it easier to understand. Why is Zeya a problem? He says, we're dealing with Zeya that has Yatzir Ledes boy that everybody would agree. I think so. He has a doubt. Because when the Pri Megadim, I'm only giving you the maskana, but if you look at the whole Pri Megadim, it's a real long one here. If you look at the whole Pri Megadim, he says, he weighs everything. He's really, this, but he's actually taking everything apart, and sometimes he even says tzorechiyun. I'm not sure, But so I think he's the one that points out that if the Zeya is Yatzer Ledes boy, everybody would agree that it would be a problem. So you can have a situation where you don't have Zayah, that much Zayah, or you don't have Zayah Sheyat Seletis, boy, then why would you wouldn't have, even according to, I don't think the Aruch Hashem would machmer, Mishar against the whole thing that's in it. Just a tapshir.
Otherwise, why would it run?
Because it depends how high it is, remember? The Zayah is rising.
But it has to reach a certain in order to start.
You know what, I think I would agree with you. In thinking about it, I once did put my hand just to test it. And Zayah was pretty hot.
Yeah, so this is
And Zayah was pretty hot.
Yeah, so
yeah, you can't put, you try putting your hand on top of a cholent pot, on top, even a few inches above. You can't hold it for too long. That steam is Yatzer. But you know what? Otherwise, there's no real Zayah. That's the thing.
Yeah, why would it rise? It has to reach a critical temperature.
Yeah, but the thing is, maybe very,
then
very
it
high.
cools off.
Yeah.
How high is the ladle?
I think that's what it is. I think that was. I think if it's high enough, it's not that hot.
Eventually, it'll cool off.
Yeah, that's what happens.
But once it's presumably reached enough of a temperature to rise, you would have to measure if it cooled off sufficiently.
Yeah.
You can't just make the.
So I would agree with what you're saying. I think that at some point, especially if your hand is low, the spoon is low, the steam is already rising, and there's already steam, then it would be Yatzer. But it could be that if it's higher, then it would cool off by the time it reaches.
But you would need to cool off sufficiently.
Yeah, you could feel it.
Yeah, so this was pretty.
It would have to be a long spoon too. Anyway, yeah. So that's the Pri Megadim in explaining Zayah. But that's one of the issues here. That why would I be concerned about the portion that's sticking out? Only because of Zayah. But not everybody agrees with it. Sticking out of the food. Not sticking out of the pot. That which is sticking out of the pot is not affected by the Zayah because it scatters. Remember we talked about scattering in the ovens?
But that would be still subject to
Why?
Oh
yeah. If you hold like Rabbeinu parrots, right? Because of chametz, even if it's sticking out, right? So that would be the one chiluk that is not. It appears to be from the Mechaber's words that he holds kedera, but I don't think so. Especially halacha lemaisa, we hold a lot of poskim don't hold like that. You have to be concerned about the portion that's outside the tafshil, just because it's inside the pot. A lot of poskim don't. But there are a few that do say that this is the issue, that Zayah is the issue. Okay, now let's go over to the shach. I think this will finish. There's a very interesting shach. Now this is not the shach over here. The shach is in Siman Kuf Chof Aleph, Nachshoros Kelim, in Chelek's Beis Yore Deah. Actually, the shach does bring himself here. He says like this: we agree. Right? The beer won't go everywhere. That's what he means about what he wrote more about it. A very long shach in Kuf Chof Aleph, Siman there. Ve'af dasa mechaber shesvora rishona ikar. כמו שכוספתי בסימן זה ספקות נחוף חס, וכן כוסף סבור אחרונה בשם יש מי שאומר. Okay, so he's also basically saying even though Mechaber brings both, he holds more like the first svora, which is the smak, where you don't have to concern yourself, even though it's true, you don't have to concern yourself with the outer part. What he doesn't say here is his shita, shitas of the shach. And that he explains in Siman Kuf Chof Aleph. He says, according to him, there's no difference between what is being absorbed now and what's already absorbed. You never say that the blias travel from one part to the other just by heat alone. In other words, it won't make a difference whether it's already there or whether it's being absorbed now. Cham kuloi does not have the koach to make it travel from one point to the other. According to this shach, and I'm going to explain it a little bit more, he will say, therefore, that even if the whole spoon is hot, even if the whole thing is hot, forget about the top being cold, because he's saying it doesn't make a difference whether what's balua there now or what's being nivla now, it doesn't go. Which means that even if the whole thing was hot, he doesn't hold cham kuloi enables the, even though that's true, it has nothing to do with blias and plitas. Which means it's not being nivla, and whatever is there already balua is not being niflat. Right? It's not being absorbed to the other, and whatever is absorbed already is not coming out either. Remember, What's understood from this? It's understood from this is that even if the whole thing is hot, he's the only one that says it, I believe, that even if the whole spoon is hot, it makes no difference. Cham mitzvos cham kulo, yes, but not for this. Then for what? Oh, where does cham mitzvos cham kulo make a difference? And we saw this a little bit. He says that if you have a keli, that a part of it is hot, and an isser is sitting at the other end, a real isser is sitting at the other end of this keli, the whole thing will become asa. It's a form of tatoa gover, like. It says, cham mitzvos cham kuloi, if the isser is at the other edge, then it will become asa. Because of the heat down here below, and real isser, not tam traveling from here to there, but heat traveling, and as a result of the heat traveling, it's like a blech. You know what a blech does? You can warm up your food at the other end because cham mitzvos cham kulo. I mean, even though it's not above the burner, right? You cover your fire and start with a blech, yeah.
So in order for it to travel from the cold part of the metal to the hot part and then into the food, to be the actual thing itself.
The actual thing itself.
If it's only an absorbed taste, say that
it doesn't affect. It doesn't in either.
It cannot.
It cannot. It doesn't have the head koach. That's one situation where he would say that's the cham mitzvos cham kulo applies to that. Plus, there's a big chiddush in the shach, and this one I think is not just the shach. I remember he quotes somebody else too. Marshal, I remember. Big difference. I think we saw part of it in Taaruvot. You know, when I don't say my spor of cham mitzvos cham kulo does not affect the rest, that's my bishul. Bishul, I put a spoon into a pot of water. It's hot at the bottom. Cham mitzvos cham kulo, it won't. The tam in the bottom won't travel to the top. It just doesn't work like that. That's in bishul. But guess what? I have some news to tell you. Shach says, if you have a barbecue, a piece of metal on the edge directly, no water, no bishul, cham mitzvos cham kuloi. So if you have isser, tam isser on one edge, it will travel to the other edge. You have isser on this edge, and you stick it into heter through fire, through tzli.
Stick what into it?
This barbecue. Right? Mm-hmm. It will travel.
Well, that he already said cooking. If the chiddush were here, I thought was if tzli, then even Isser itself is absent. And also
yes, that's what I said. That's what I said.
Oh, I thought because
I maybe didn't explain the second part. The first part was the tam of the Isser in this piece of metal will travel to the other end of the metal if it's fire. Plus, I didn't explain it well. The tam on this spit will travel into heter. In other words, if I stuck it into a duck, that I'm roasting or whatever, the tam, I should say, will also travel. Cham mitzvos cham kuloi. On the fire, yes. Bishul, no.
It'll travel from one end of the spot to
on the metal itself. Just the metal. No big difference. All it is that
either it goes into the food or it doesn't. If it doesn't, then it doesn't care if it travels in that.
Well, really, the first example is more isser. Something it's becoming usser. Somehow it's becoming usser, and the isser will travel to the other end. Okay. And my second example is that the isser is there. It will exit into a heter. Yeah, that's basically it. Regardless, so he says that this can happen through fire, cham mitzvos cham kuloi, but not through cooking. So very interesting. So basically, cham mitzvos cham kuloi, according to the shach, can happen in two situations. One situation is that the isser is sitting there, even though it's sitting in the cold. Yeah, but that cold piece of metal is connected to, is one long piece of metal, and part of it is hot. It's going to become aser. And the second scenario is where we're talking about tzli versus bishul. So in this case, we have bishul and nekdera, and that's why, it doesn't appear to be a problem according to many poskim. According to the shach, even if the whole spoon was hot, the way he learns cham mitzvos cham kuloi, it would not make a difference. If only half of it is hot, the bottom, the top part, I'm not going to be concerned about the cold part.
You just that if only half of it is hot.
I mixed the two cases. In other words, even if the whole thing is hot, according to the Shach, it won't make a difference.
The whole,
What?
the whole thing.
In other words, the part of the spoon being in the tafshil will not affect the part of the spoon that's outside the tafshil, even though the whole spoon is hot.
Aha.
Right? When Mikvaot said before, yes, even though according to the Smak, we may say, like the first sheet in the Mechaber, that we only be Meshar against that which is in the tafshil. Yeah, but if the whole spoon would be hot, that would be different. And a lot of people, a lot of places would tend to seem to hold like that, because what's the chiddush of Chamitzos Cham Kuloi? That, in other words, the chiddush that even though Chamitzos Cham Kuloi, we're not concerned. What's the chiddush? We're not concerned because it doesn't affect it. In other words, it doesn't travel. It doesn't. The time doesn't travel. But if the whole thing would be hot, maybe it would be a problem. Supposedly, the shach, according to the shach, it won't make a difference. What spoon is half cold, half hot, or the whole thing is hot. By him, of course, Chamitzos Cham Kuloi is only those two scenarios that I said. Either the Isser is on the other edge, or the case of Tzli, which is very, very interesting. I mean, the case
If the whole spoon is saying Chamitzos, because I don't have Chamitzos.
I don't have Chamitzos, right?
Right, so it's not cool.
No, but even in the
But
case,
if it's
Right.
Kedera or Tafshil,
yeah, right.
if the whole spoon is hot, then my question is it Kedera or Tafshil?
Yeah, no, but I'm saying even in the case where we say Chamitzos or Cham Kuloi, according to the first sheet in the Mechaber, we're still not makbid, because we're still not makbid, even though we say it's true. We hold like Chamitzos or Cham Kuloi, but it doesn't affect the blias. The time doesn't travel. Only according to the second answer is Chamitzos or Cham Kuloi the real explanation, the real reason of why we're concerned. So basically, we hold like the first one as to what part of the spoon is in the. In other words, is it only the portion that's in the tafshil or the whole portion that's in the kedera? You have a few poskim that are machmir because of the zeya. I don't see that in the Mechaber, even though he uses the word there. I don't see it. So you can obviously rely. They even tell you that you can rely on the shach if there's a hefset. That he says even if the whole thing is hot. So kol shekain, I would venture to say that you don't have to be machmir because of the zeh and the rest of this if it's a long spoon. The only thing is how much of the spoon went in. Like we said before, we don't know. This much, how deep is it? What you can tell. You see how much is left over as long as it wasn't. It did not. You look at the dish and you stick in a spoon and you can see how far it went. You can more or less figure it out, unless after now you don't have that much left over. It evaporated.
Depends what he did with the din.
Yeah, exactly. But either way, the point is still the same. That once we know that it was used during that day, then of course it becomes an issue. What if you don't know if you use it that day? There are certain sfeikas that will be a sfeika deraisa. Remember, we have to remember that. That sometimes a suffix is not just, okay, it's a suffix. No, depending if it's a suffix deraisa or a suffix derabbanan. Tam ke'ikar is deraisa, we hold. Right?
If you take it most items.
So we have a chazak on those. You're right. A very good point too. On some things we have chazakas. Stam keilim inam bnei yoima. So that would be good. That would help us in this particular situation. But in other situations where I don't know how much went in and so forth, you may want to be machmer. Just to be on the safe side that it's a suffix. But that's a good point. You don't know if you used it or not. Yeah, within the last day or so. And even remember, even if you did use it, it could be that you didn't really use it in something that was completely milachik, as we said before. So that would be a separate question. And if you did use it, did you use it in a clear rishon? You see? So there, the situation, of course, becomes a little bit easier to handle. Okay, I think we'll stop here. Mr. Hashem, continue Thursday.